Hi there, in this video I'm going to show you how to cook the perfect backyard beginner brisket. My name's Ben, this is Smoking Hot Confessions, and we love barbecue. So if you love barbecue too, consider liking this video, giving it a share with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Now, a lot of people get really worried about cooking a brisket. They think it's the hardest thing to do. And I will admit, the first go, you are going to worry about it a bit. It can be a little bit tricky, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm going to show you a few little tips and techniques to help you get there. Let's get this bad boy unwrapped and have a look at it. Now, this brisket I got here today is a really big guy. It's about 7 kilos, or about 15.5 pounds in the American money. It's very unlikely that you're going to find yourself a fresh brisket at a butcher. They almost all come cryovac like this. And sometimes, if it's been cryovac, it can get a bit of a funny smell when you first open it. But don't panic, just open it up, give it a couple of minutes to breathe. I'm sure it's going to come good. Now that it's out of the cryovac, the first thing I like to do is give it a good wipe with a piece of paper towel. This is going to clear up any excess blood, any excess juices, and also if there is that cryovac smell, it's going to help clear that up as well. Okay, now as I said before, brisket can be a little tricky to cook. Can be, and that's because a brisket is essentially two muscles. You've got the point and the flat. Now the point and the flat actually overlap each other, and they're on a slightly different angle to each other, which is where the different muscles are going to cook at different times. That's where you can get some of that trickiness. Now this particular brisket, you can see it's already had quite a lot of the point trimmed off the top. I was probably going to do that anyway, just to avoid the point from sticking up like a shark's fin. So when it does come time to trimming, you're going to find you've got a bit of soft fat, and you're going to find you've got a bit of hard fat. Now just remember, soft fat good, hard fat bad. We want to get rid of as much of that hard fat as possible. Be as careful as possible. You want to try and get as much of the fat off the top as you can without cutting through to the meat below. Can get a bit tricky because of course you can't see through the fat to see where the meat starts. But just go slow, be patient, you'll get there. Want to be pedantic, you can get in here and get this silver skin as well. I'm going to give it a go, but to be honest, I don't really worry too much about it. This big fat seam through the middle runs between the point and the flat, and it is tempting to get in there and really dig all that hard fat out of there. The more you take out, the more you risk that point standing up like a shark's fin, and it's not going to cook evenly with the rest of the brisket. So take off as much, basically just to try and make it a smooth graduation down to the flat without really digging in between the two. Now there is one important thing that I do need to show you. If we turn this brisket over, or turn him around, one of the things you'll see and you'll feel when you've got yours is there's this line of gristle in here, and you can even see that little line through there. That's quite gristly through there, and that's not going to cook out very nicely. So I'm just going to run the knife down there and take that right off. Now see all that? That's still reasonable meat. And all we're going to do is we're going to keep that, we're going to throw that through the mincer, and we're going to use that for another recipe. You can see that fat seam through there that I was talking about on the other side. That's that fat seam that's coming through over here. So we're going to just trim up the back of this brisket now, and then we'll flip him over and have a look at the other side. That line of gristle that I mentioned before was actually running right along this edge of the brisket as well. So I've had to just cut that off, square that up as best I could. This is not a competition brisket, this is a backyard brisket, so it doesn't need to be perfect. So I'm happy enough with the top of this. Let's have a look at the other side. This is a nice thick flat, which is very good. We've got reasonable consistency through there. I'm probably going to trim that little bit off there because that's quite a deal thinner. As I said, don't worry about this, you're not wasting it. We're going to use that in another recipe. Now we are still going to try and take as much of it off as we can, and I'm going to just try and take as much of this hard fat here that I can without actually separating it through that line, because I definitely don't want to be doing that. Okay, so I've trimmed off a few more of those thinner sections around here just to try and make the thickness of it as uniform as I can. Now we are looking at the underside, so we are sitting up on the point from behind. That's why it looks like it's sloping down to you. I've knocked off the excess hard fat from around here, but like I said, I don't want to dig in because I don't want to actually separate them at this stage. I want to cook the whole brisket as one piece. So let's flip it over and get to seasoning. When it comes to seasoning a brisket, it can be as simple as salt and pepper. If that's the way you want to go, I really recommend those sea salt flakes and the fresh cracked black pepper. That's going to give you a much better mouthfeel when you bite those slices. But today I'm actually going to be using brisket from Smoky Pastures. It's an Australian group out of South Australia, and they do some great stuff. So as always, keep the bottle as high as you can, creating a nice even spread across the brisket. The lower you hold the bottle, the more likely you are you're going to dump it all where you don't want it. I don't bother using a binder. I find the meat is juicy enough, and I just like to give it a pat with my hand just to make sure it all stays there. So now the brisket's seasoned, and so is my tablecloth. It's off to the smoker. Okay, to smoke our brisket today, we're going to use the Stretch by Jagged Wood Fired, and we're going to be running it on some beautiful ironbark splits from Ministry of Smoke. Look at that. Properly prepared and dried, split super easy, and leaves a beautiful clean smoke taste on the meat. We're just going to lay our brisket across this shelf here in the Jagged. Pay no attention to the Boston butt in the top, that's for another video. Now I've already got an ambient probe set up behind the Boston butt up there, measuring the internal temperature of the smoker. This one is going to go into the brisket, and it's going to monitor the internal temperature of the brisket. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to shove this into about the middle of the brisket, nice and deep in there, and I'm going to let that stay in the smoker doing its thing until that hits about 165 degrees Fahrenheit. The smoker itself, we're aiming for 275 Fahrenheit, and at that rate it should take about 3 to 4 hours before it hits 165, at which point we're going to move to stage 2 because that's where the stall starts. The tools you need to do a brisket are super simple. I've got an instant read thermometer, thin bladed boning knife, a brisket knife, and of course a nice steel to keep them all good and sharp. All right, our brisket's just at 165 Fahrenheit, so we're well and truly in the stall. So now it's time to open it up and have a look. I'm excited. All right, so our brisket is looking absolutely fantastic. We've got this beautiful bark going around the outside. You can see you've got that nice textured finish down the end there. There is a little bit of moisture pooling, but it's a backyard brisket. I'm not too worried about that. Give it a little poke, see if there's a bit of wiggle. Looks pretty good. Let's take it inside, and I'll show you a trick to get it through the rest of the stall. So here's our brisket. It is looking fantastic. It's at 165 internal temperature, which means we're well and truly at the stall point. Now, if you're not familiar with the stall is the point where the meat no longer increases in temperature. It plateaus, and it won't stop. It will continue plateauing, and eventually you can push through and get it up to the 203 degrees Fahrenheit that we're looking for. However, there is a trick to get it through faster, and that's what I'm going to show you now. The crutch is really straightforward. 2 large pieces of the thickest foil you can possibly find laid in a nice big cross. We're going to take our brisket, we're going to put it lengthways on the first piece, and we're going to wrap it up. Now this brisket goes back in the smoker. We're going to put the probe through the foil, and we're just going to basically use the smoker like an oven until that brisket hits 203. Trust me, you want to wait till 203. So it's a couple hours later now, and the brisket is at temperature. I've opened it up to check it out, and it is smelling fine. We've got a ton of these juices caught in that now triple layer of foil, so we're going to keep them later on. Now what we're looking for is we're looking for it to feel soft. Very little resistance is what we want. We want the probe to feel like it's a hot knife going through butter. So you don't necessarily need an instant read thermometer like this, because what's more important than the temperature is the way that it feels. You want that almost zero resistance against the probe. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just gently let this steam off for about another 10-15 minutes. Then I'm going to wrap it back up, very gently, carefully wrap it in a towel, sit it in a dry esky, and let that sit for at least an hour. What that's going to do is that's going to let the heat gradually dissipate, and the muscles are going to relax even more. It's going to be so good. The next tip is a really good one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that brisket out of the foil, sit it on the cutting board directly. Then you'll see this fat separator here. I'm going to take all those juices out of there, pour it into the fat separator, allow that to cool, which will separate the fat into the pure beef juice. Then, after I've sliced the brisket, that pure beef juice gets put back over the top. Oh yeah. So you remember from the start of the video, I told you that a steel and a brisket knife were going to come in handy. Well, guess what? It's time. goodness, that is just about as close to perfect as it gets. I mean, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't squeeze it like that, but damn, look at that run out of there. Beautiful smoke ring around the outside. Nice bark, beautifully done on the inside. You can see the difference there between the flat and the point. This is delicious. All right, I finished slicing up this brisket. There's actually too much for one tray, so I've separated the point slices from the flat slices. The flat slices, I'm actually going to reserve and use them in a couple of different recipes later on, so keep an eye out for those videos. If you think you know what I'm going to do with it, let me know in the comments below. Now, the fat separator's done its thing, and this tells you two things. One, tells you that my table's on an angle because you can see the fat and the meat juice is separated on an angle there. It's going to grab this, press this handle, and there it goes. All that concentrated meat juice goes back onto those brisket slices, which means you know what I got to do now. Ooh, I sliced a bit thick, but oh, look at that, nice and springy. It's got a oh, it's so beefy. And I got to tell you, even if that is a basic beginner backyard brisket, no one is going to leave your place unhappy if you serve that. So if you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. So till next time, take care of each other and keep on queuing.